We're going to dive into a question today that so many families and teachers think about. Why is it that some of our brightest, most wonderful, creative kids have such a tough time with learning? In this explainer, we're going to break it all down. The what, the why, and maybe most importantly, what we can actually do to help.
This is really the heart of it, isn't it? It's a question that keeps parents and educators up at night. You see all that potential, you know how smart they are, but there's this frustrating gap when it comes to things like reading or writing or even math. It's gotta be so confusing for the child, and honestly, just heartbreaking for the adults who love them.
And that right there, that's why this matters so much. When a kid is struggling and they don't know why, it can just eat away at their confidence. Like this quote from our source material says, "The fallout isn't just about grades, it's deeply emotional, and it can ripple out and affect the entire family." Figuring out what's really going on is the first step to turning that whole story around. Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, we need to zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. We're going to start with a whole category of conditions called specific learning disabilities, or SLDs for short. Think of this as the foundation for understanding things like dyslexia.
So what in the world is a specific learning disability? Well, the most important word in that whole definition is unexpected. We're talking about a kid who has totally average or even above average intelligence. Their struggle has nothing to do with how smart they are. It's a specific neurological difference in how their brain is wired to take in and process information.
And here's a number that might really surprise you. Specific learning disabilities affect about 10% of all children. That's 1 in every 10 kids. So this isn't some rare, uncommon thing. It's a challenge that's happening in classrooms everywhere, which makes having this conversation so important. And SLDs can show up in a lot of different ways. We tend to immediately think of reading and writing, right? But they can also impact a child's ability with math, how they understand language, their physical coordination, and even their social and emotional development. It's a really broad spectrum. All right, so now that we have the lay of the land, let's zoom in and put a spotlight on the most well-known SLD of them all, dyslexia. By taking a closer look at this one, we can get a much clearer idea of how these challenges actually look in the real world.
The word dyslexia literally comes from Greek for difficulty with words. It's a type of SLD that zeroes in specifically on reading, even though the child has a normal IQ. Fun fact, it used to be called word blindness, which I think really paints a picture of how people first saw it, not an issue with their eyes, but an inability for the brain to make sense of the words it was seeing.
And this right here is a perfect example of that processing challenge. This is the classic mix-up. A child with dyslexia sees the letter B, but their brain might flip it and register it as a D. Same thing with P and Q. Now, this isn't them being careless or not trying, it's their brain having a genuinely hard time telling these mirror image shapes apart.
Okay, so now that we have a better idea of what it is, how do you actually spot it? Let's get practical and talk about the key signs, the things you might actually see that could point to a child dealing with dyslexia.
Some really common signs are things like being hesitant to read out loud, or reading in a flat, monotone voice. You might see them tracing the words with their finger. That's because so much of their brain power is just focused on decoding what's on the page. Now look, a lot of young kids do these things. The real clue is when these habits stick around in a kid who's otherwise really bright and capable. That's when you want to pay a little closer attention.
It's also good to know that these signs don't just appear at one set time. For some kids, an early speech delay can be a clue. For many others, the struggles really start to show up between ages 5 and 7, when reading instruction gets serious. But for some kids, especially if it's a milder case, you might not notice anything is off until the schoolwork gets a lot harder, maybe around age 8 or even later. But no matter when it shows up, the most important thing, always, is catching it early.
Recognizing there's a problem is a huge first step, but it's everything that comes next that really changes a child's life. So let's walk through that path, from just noticing something's up to providing real, empowering support.
So here it is, a clear, 4-step game plan. It all starts with early recognition, just admitting, okay, there's a challenge here. Then you get a professional assessment to figure out exactly what's going on. That leads to a learning plan that's tailored just for them. But honestly, step 4 is maybe the most powerful of them all, building up their self-esteem. It's about sitting them down and explaining that this is not their fault. It's telling them, you are so smart, your brain just learns in a different way.
And that just leads perfectly to this powerful idea from our source material.
Because while all the specialists and educators are absolutely vital, parents have a role that no one else can fill. Your encouragement, your patience, your unwavering belief in your child, that's the foundation that everything else is built on. You are their first and you're their most important teacher.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. What if we just completely reframe this whole conversation? What if instead of seeing these challenges as a deficit, as something missing, we started seeing them as just a different way of thinking, a different operating system that often comes with its own incredible strengths, like out-of-the-box creativity and amazing problem-solving skills? I think that perspective could change everything. Thanks for joining me.